Welcome to Realms Unknown, a sci-fi and fantasy podcast brought to you by The Bugle. The sun bled crimson over the towering walls of Urrrgh, casting long shadows across the city's mud brick. Gilgamesh, king of heroes, stood atop the ramparts, lion's pelt draped across broad shoulders, scarred by that lion's claws, grip relaxed around the shaft of his axe. Below, the people moved, so human in their concerns. He was glad at the distance, the space to think about how like he was to them and how unlike. 2/3 God, 1/3 man, the old words shifted silently across his tongue. Then he turned his head slightly, acknowledging but not meeting the eyes of the youth whose approach stirred the wind at his shoulders. Enkidu, the wild one, hair still untamed though clad in the robes of a prince, eyes sharp with knowing. Gilgamesh did not want to be known in this moment. You brood like a storm cloud, Enkidu said, leaning against the stone, looking out. Gilgamesh finally faced him. You were born of earth and sky, yet you stand here bound to me. Do you not hunger for the wild still? Enkidu's smile faded. The gods shaped me for a purpose. A silence stretched between them, heavy as the desert dusk. Gilgamesh turned back to the city. Look at them, he murmured, nodding towards the people below. They raised their voices in song, and yet their eyes are full of Realms Unknown. Yeah, that's right. You just entered Realms Unknown, a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by The Bugle, in which we discuss tropes, news, our favorite old and new shows, books, games, and more in science fiction and fantasy. I'm your host, published author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the creature to my Frankenstein, the Tars Tarkus to my John Carter, the Montgomery to my Dr. Moreau, the Jonathan Harker to my Van Helsing. It is Eleanor Morton. Welcome.
Hello, how are you?
I am delighted to be here in this time and place. A reminder to the listeners to subscribe to the Bugle channel, and all the books that we cover here will be in our affiliate store, which is linked in the show notes, and all of the other games and television shows and so on that we might discuss will also be in the show notes. Now, for the news. This is news that the new season of Foundation will be back on Apple Television in July. This is extremely exciting. The first teaser has dropped. Eleanor, are you a Foundation watcher?
I'm not a Foundation watcher purely because I don't have Apple TV, and I would never watch anything illegally. So I'm not. But this is it's based on Isaac Asimov, isn't it? Well, not on him the man.
Yeah.
His book.
The Life of Isaac Asimov. No, yes, it's Isaac Asimov's Foundation through the lens of sort of modern sensibility. There's a lot of cross-gender casting and race-blind casting, and I think sort of makes it more dynamic. But it also has kind of tended a little bit more towards television-friendly interpretations of maths as sort of magic, which is not my favorite thing.
Maths generally, or just...
Oh, well, maths... Well, first of all, I'm not particularly good at maths, but I know it's not magic.
No. Although it does seem like it when you use a calculator, but yes.
Well, very broadly, the vague premise of Foundation is that you can, if you have a good enough algorithm, you can tell what's going to happen in the future using predictive text. And the hero, Harry Sheldon, is the one who figures out the maths. But the way that they've interpreted the maths in the show is sort of maths is powered by love, which is...
Not when I did it at school, it wasn't.
No, it was powered by deep, deep loathing. Although my favorite maths at school story is my friend whose primary school teacher had pi to like 100 digits written out across the top of the wall, all of the numbers going around the wall, and she spent the whole year memorizing the number. And at the end of the year, very proudly went to the teacher and said, I know pi to 100 digits. And the teacher said, wow, how did you learn that? And she said, I learned it from the top of the wall in our classroom. And the teacher was like, oh, no. I just wrote the first 7 and made the rest up.
No. Oh, my God. What else is a lie that we've been taught?
I know. But the teacher never expected that she would be held accountable for her lies. Terrible.
That's funny that the teacher had so low expectations of her pupils. She was like, they'll never try and learn anything. So it's fine if it's all nonsense. I mean, that is also how I would approach. I hope that this show isn't trying to teach anyone anything real, because I certainly wouldn't learn anything.
It's very much the fake pockets on jeans of maths tuition.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
In other news, this is news about history, which is Dee Wallace, who is the mother in E.T., has come out and said that during the filming of E.T., she argued with Steven Spielberg because she wanted him to cut a subplot where E.T. ends up having a love affair with the mother. Now, obviously, either she was successful or Steven Spielberg thought better of it, or there's another cut of this movie floating out there for the OnlyFans. But what do you think of it, Eleanor?
I'm very upset. I'm very upset to know that this was ever a possibility. And isn't E.T. meant to, I have no concept of, isn't he meant to be a child? Is he meant to be a child alien, or is he just an alien? I don't know. I don't know what age he's meant to be, but it's very upsetting.
This is the problem. He's either not a child, in which case he's hanging out with children in a quite
Mm.
creepy way, and has the prospect of having a love affair with the mother. And I don't want to know what happens with the glowing finger.
No,
Or
I was gonna make that joke, but I'm glad you did. It's your podcast,
thank
and
you.
you should set the tone.
I picked the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, it's I mean, I very much agree with that meme about killing him with hammers, because I was never into E.T., and yeah, if I'd been a kid and I'd seen E.T., I would have freaked out. So I think I only watched it a couple of times as a kid, and I was like, don't like this guy. I think we should send him home. So the idea of him being remotely sexual is already, it's just piling it on. Very upsetting that, and also just like very of its time there for the director to be like, what does this kids film about an alien need? Like maybe more sex, more of a sexy thing. But there was also a period, wasn't there, like a sort of alien romance films like Earth Girls Are Easy, and what was the other one? Just aliens coming to Earth and falling in love with people.
I mean, Mars Attacks was pretty sexy.
Yes, Mars Attacks. So
Coneheads.
yeah, oh god, Coneheads. I feel horrible. Horror. This is all just horrible. So yeah, I was distressed. Were you delighted to hear that, Alice? Do
No,
you wish you'd seen that cut?
I have no affiliation with E.T. I think I probably watched it once, but I also wasn't steeped in that sort of 80s nostalgia for itself as it was happening kind of cinematography. I missed a lot
Yeah,
of
no, me neither.
things and watched them later. So why are we even covering this news? Throw it in the bin. No, if you feel deeply pro this love story between E.T. and the mother, please either message us on Blue Sky, where we're Realms Unknown, or email us at realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com and let us know how you feel about this news. Other news, Margaret Attwood, very deserving, has got an award in Canada for Women in Entertainment. The Hollywood Reporter's Women in Entertainment Award. It sort of feels, I don't know, maybe just in entertainment makes it sound more trivial than it is
Yeah.
for the amount of, like, impact that she's had on the genre and on politics and on people's understanding of the world.
Yeah, and the summit for the women in entertainment thing last year was attended by, not to do them down, but people like Lily Singh and Kim Cattrall. I do feel like Margaret Atwood's contribution might be slightly higher to everything than that. But also it feels a bit like, I feel like she, the Handmaid's Tale is relevant obviously currently, and it feels a bit like, I don't know, giving her a prize instead of letting her just to kind of everyone's just like, "Oh, have a nice prize," and not like, "Let's talk about how scarily relevant all your work currently is. Let's just pretend everything's lovely." She must be tearing her hair out, but whatever. Good for her. That's what I say.
Good for her. And that brings us to our ads. Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Johnson & Johnson & Sons Martian English Phrasebook. Take me to your literate ruler. Planning a jaunt to the Red Planet, our 93% inaccurate lexicon helps you demand tea or surrender gracefully when the war machines arrive. Each lexicon includes a corrections hotline, free tips on bribing Venusian bureaucrats with luminous fungi, and half a glass of water. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably like me, Alice Fraser, and books. Did you know I wrote a book? It's very silly and it makes me laugh still when I read it to myself. So if you're anything like me, you'll love my book. It's called A Passion for Passion. It's available online internationally and in bookshops in the UK and the US. It'll be in bookshops in Australia at the end of June. You can order it online or, get the libraries to bring it in for you if you don't want me to make any money out of it and want to hate read it. Why would I offer you that option? Why are you listening to this podcast? Go away. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Skeleton Staff. That's more than just the bare bones of home maintenance. Upgrade your unheimlich scientific experiments on your remote estate with Baron Hagelbert's animated staff and skeleton brigade. No wages, no complaints about the hideous shit you're getting up to in the basement. Just creaky compliance and an eternal chill in the dining room. Buy today and get 6 pairs of flaming eye sockets for ambiance. Terms and conditions apply. No fire insurance available. Use at your own risk. And that is your ad section for today. What have you been into of late, Eleanor? What have you been reading, watching, absorbing?
I have been reading, watching, and absorbing what I normally do, which is old stuff from olden times, which is where I feel most comfortable. I've been rereading The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. Have you read this?
Yes, lovely.
The OG Jurassic Park, basically, which never gets as much credit as it should, really, for basically coming up with Jurassic Park and then kind of getting that idea reworked by someone else.
I read it about the same time as I read Dinotopia, so I had a lot of really odd dreams
Yeah.
around that period of my childhood.
Did you have an intense dinosaur phase then?
Yeah, I think so. I must have done. I mean, I once accidentally knocked my brother out by sticking him up the nose with the tail of a diplodocus, and basically
Whoa.
he got a nosebleed and fainted. And I was worried that I'd penetrated his brain, but I hadn't. So dinosaurs are dangerous. Never let anyone say that dinosaurs aren't still dangerous.
Don't bring them back, that's what I say. And I'm not that into dinosaurs generally, but I did like the book because it had a proper adventure kind of narrative, and it had Professor Challenger, which is one of the first, maybe the OG kind of sort of eccentric professor characters in literature that sort of almost like a Doctor Who sort of slightly grumpy, mad old guy who the story revolves around. And I feel bad for Conan Doyle because I think obviously Sherlock Holmes is the thing he's known for, and I think he was good at other stuff. And I know everyone's like, yeah, but what about more Sherlock Holmes? And he's like, oh, fine. So I feel like this book needs more light on it because it is also very it's it's an easy read, and what's not to like about dinosaurs in a magical world full of dinosaurs.
And also the sort of the pleasing aura in it of anything could be around the corner, of that sort of late stage empire where you could still just find a country or a thing.
Yeah, yeah, and the kind of just before the collapse of the whole thing, where anything was possible, and we were all we were still romanticizing other people's cultures, and crystal skulls and temples and things, and maybe dinosaurs also lived there. Who knows? Question mark. I think it was. I'm not going to say a simpler time because it definitely wasn't. It was a worse time in most ways.
But the only people who were talking about it were the ones that were having an okay time. So that's what matters.
Exactly. But I think a lot of modern sci-fi has that story specifically to thank for a lot of the kind of plot devices and tropes that we see now that I do enjoy.
Excellent. I've been reading The Daughter's War by Christopher Buehlman, which is grimdark. It's pretty brutal. They have some fantastically awful goblin antagonists.
Cool.
So they're sort of coming in and they're better at military stuff than the humans, and so they're taking over quite rapidly. They have sort of treaties of land, and it's like they call it horde law, a bit like Dane law, an imaginative kind of take on the Vikings. Our protagonist is a female warrior. There are more female warriors present, but it's not an unrealistic scenario because basically the men have all been eaten. The goblins use people as food, and when they take over land, then they farm people as food. And
Oh,
it's
dark.
yeah, they use mushrooms as biological weapons. It's got a lot of kind of World War II themes because the goblins keep bringing new technology to the table for these horrific battles. It's darker than I normally like to read, but it's well written enough that I'm sticking with it.
Ooh.
That's what I've been reading. I can recommend it, but you have to be in the right mood for it. It's maybe not the last thing to read at night if you don't want to have creepy visions at the back of your eyeballs as you close your eyes.
What if you hate mushrooms?
If you hate mushrooms, then I recommend you don't read that or my last week's recommendation, which was Mushroom Blues, because that's
She's on a
very,
mushroom
very
kick.
fungal chat. I am actually. Yeah, a touch of corruption, also a lot of mushrooms in that. So I've been unwittingly theming myself along fungal lines.
Can I recommend one more thing?
Yes, please.
I was also rereading The Edge Chronicles from sort of the early to mid 2000s. It was Paul Stewart and Chris Riddle, and you recognize Chris Riddle's illustrations because they're very unique. The premise was this world that was sort of, I guess the world was completely made up of the edge of a world. So it was a cliff that jutted into space. No one ever went further along the cliff into the clouds above to see what was there. They all sort of lived on the edge of this cliff, and society was sort of a feudalist society with a university with all these professors who studied the sky and the wind and all these things. And then there was these sky pirates who were they had these big sort of 18th century ships that they could fly through space, and so it's just all about one of the people who lives there and his journey. He's an orphan, and he discovers his background, but he meets all these weird creatures that live on the edge, and they're all very unique and memorable, and the illustrations really make them stick in your brain as well. As they're sort of gross and weird and fun. So I love those books. I love that. I don't know what you'd call that. Sort of cyberpunk, I suppose.
A touch of steampunk.
Steampunk, that's what I meant. I did mean steampunk.
So when you
Steampunky
said
kind
sky
of.
pirates or skyrates, as
Yes.
no one else calls them that.
Skyrats.
I don't know why no one else calls them that.
They're great books. I really recommend. They are for children, but they're really great. And if you've got children, you should read them to your children because they're very cool and they're very vivid and not unique necessarily, but certainly I think no one else has done this idea quite like they have. So The Edge Chronicles are some of my favourites.
Now it's time for Trope on a Rope. Eleanor, this is where we talk about a particular trope that you either really love every time you come across it, or you've seen too much of, and you'd be happy if you never saw it again. What's your trope on a rope, Eleanor?
I don't know if I love or hate this, but I recognize it every time, and I don't remember what the exact name is, but it's that thing where you pull someone's necklace and it just breaks really easily, and you could just pull it off. Like it is a real trope. I've seen it on the TV tropes page, but do you know, like when a necklace is part of a plot device, and the antagonist or someone needs to snatch it, so they just go click and off it comes. And if you've ever worn a necklace, you'll know that would be incredibly painful and difficult. But in the fantasy world, jewelry is super flexible and breaks when you need it to, but not when you don't.
Yeah, very important. Yeah, sometimes you could be caught by something as simple as a necklace and held off the edge of a cliff or something for as long as you needed it to hold. But if you want to snap it, you could
Yeah.
snap it. Very variable strengths for armor that's a great
Yeah.
trope. Metal plot armor, metal being malleable to the needs of the plot. My trope on a rope, relevant to the Daughters War, is women fighting men one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat where the physical differences are not accounted for or mentioned. So, like, I don't mind if you explain how it works. You know, is she a massive, beefy woman who's done a lot of training? Is she super quick and vicious? Does she have techniques? Does she have a weaponry advantage? Like, if you've ever done any kind of wrestling or hand-to-hand combat, basically, whoever's bigger and stronger tends to win, and guys tend to be bigger and stronger. So, if it's not to say that women can't beat men in a fight, but you got to explain to me how it's working, for it not to piss me off, I guess.
I like when in an action film when there's a male female fight and somehow the man always avoids directly hitting or punching the woman because it's like, we can't have that. Even if they're in a fight, we can't show that. That would be inappropriate. I always think that's funny.
Yes, and weirdly, there is more and more appearing in books where it's like, "I'll hit a woman.
Mm,
Sure, I will."
yeah. Sign of the times.
Sort of counterbalance it.
Yeah.
It would be sexist not to. Our subgenre submarine, where we do a deep dive into a particular subgenre in science fiction and fantasy. Our subgenre submarine this week is early sci-fi and fantasy. In deference to your tastes, Eleanor, we're going very early,
Mhm.
pre sort of, I guess, for fantasy pre-Tolkien, maybe,
Yeah.
and for sci-fi, maybe up until about the early, maybe 1920s. So where these kind of really amoebic forms are coming up. So I'm going to start straight up with, obviously, Mary Shelley doing Frankenstein,
Yes.
earliest sci-fi, arguably. If you
Yes.
don't know, if you don't know about Frankenstein, medical student Victor Frankenstein, he creates life from reanimated corpse parts, but it doesn't work so well. Or the progeny is rejected by him and is monstrous in the eyes of society and turns vengeful. But I would also like to mention a lesser known work by Mary Shelley,
Mm. Mhm.
1826, The Last Man.
Ooh, I've not heard of this one.
Well, with the resurgence of 28 Days Later, or the sequel to 28 Days Later, 28 Days After that, The Last Man is very much the predecessor of that. A plague has wiped out humanity in the 21st century, and the sole survivor chronicles the collapse of civilization. And of course, it's got these like bleak abandonment themes because her husband Shelley had died 4 years before she wrote it, and Byron had died 2 years
Yes.
ago as well before she wrote it. So she's very much feeling like the last survivor of this cadre. It's got a lot of discussion. It's got this futuristic British state as a republic,
Ooh.
and she sat apparently in the House of Commons to gain insight into the government system. It's very early dystopian, sort of precursor to all these post-apocalypses, and it's really beautiful. If you like Frankenstein, you'll love The Last Man.
Why do you think, it didn't do as well? Or isn't as well remembered?
I think it might have been the COVID problem because there had been plague
Mm.
fairly recently in people's memory.
Oh, it's too close to home.
Yeah, in a way, I think. Whereas
Mm.
sort of experiments with electricity and life and death were more exciting and fun.
Yes, they were cool and not depressing, yeah.
One of the things about sort of world apocalypses, they're not so fun if you've been in like if your village has had an apocalypse, a little mini apocalypse. It's
Yeah. Well, I always
not
think
so
that about
entertaining.
sci-fi and dystopias when it sort of shows like, a world in which the rich are insanely rich and the poor are insanely poor. And I'm like, that's just some countries now. Like, do people in those countries watch these things and go, yeah, that's our life. It's not a dystopia.
Like when they filmed Elysium with Matt
Yeah.
Damon, and they just basically used the favelas to do
Yeah.
it.
It's a bit rude.
And they're like, we don't have to build a set. That's just
Yeah, because ultimately they're all just reflections of what we're all thinking right now, which is stuff that's real. So
that is one of those movies where you can just see the studio notes come in at about 2/3 of the way through. If you don't know the plot, he gets exposed to radiation, and so he wants to go onto the rich people's turf because they have healing machines, basically. He wants to break in, and then his old girlfriend comes back and she's got a sick child to up the stakes. You're like,
uh-oh.
Okay." And then there's this great baddie who's South African, just incredibly good South African baddie, and then he sort of gets killed off, and then they bring in another baddie who's sort of world stakes, and it just feels like, no, the story that you started with would have worked
Yeah,
totally fine, but then you'd kind of up the stakes.
up the ante.
What's your recommendation for old sci-fi or fantasy?
Well, I have a sort of love-hate relationship with Jules Verne because I really love his ideas. He had a dinosaurs in the middle of the earth story. He did obviously Around the World in 80 Days, and he did 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which I thought meant vertical leagues under the sea, but it means horizontal. That took me a long time to realize because I was like, wow, that's really deep. No, it's going under the sea. So I love his ideas, but when you actually read the books, they're very painting by the numbers in that the things all happen and then they all go home. Like, they go to the center of the earth and then they come back again. He doesn't really put a lot of time and effort into characterization or sort of other plots or anything. And I'm always left wanting more. But I love the visuals and sort of Captain Nemo at his organ and all that stuff that again influence loads of things. So I do recommend them because they're fun and stuff. But you certainly go away from it going, it's sort of like if you asked an accountant to write a fantasy novel, he'd be like, "Right, I've hit all the points, and now it's over." And I think there's a bit in I can't remember. I haven't read it for ages. In 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where somebody asks why Captain Nemo's like that, and they just say, he's just a bit weird," and they're like, "Okay." Or there's a sad backstory for Captain Nemo, but we never go anywhere with it. It's just kind of there. So I think Jules Verne had great ideas, but not a lot of emotional depth perhaps for some of carrying them out, but you can't be mad at him because he also again influenced so many other very cool fun sci-fi fantasy things in the future.
And to be fair to him, he was writing before they invented men having feelings.
Exactly. You don't want, and he's French, so God knows what he was thinking.
I'm going to recommend a Jules Verne as well then.
Mhm.
From the Earth to the Moon. Again, a lesser
Mm.
known, everyone knows the Under the Sea one, but From the Earth to the Moon, which is 1865, the Baltimore Gun Club builds a giant cannon to launch humans to the moon. And it's got space travel.
Very on brand.
Yeah, it's got a satire of militarism. It predicted sort of lunar mission logistics. Apparently, it inspired some real rocketry. So Jules Verne hitting it out of the park there. But yes, as you say, characterization. I think basically you're drawing from when you're with this kind of early sci-fi and early fantasy, and
Yeah.
the crossover between the two is tricky, obviously, because
Yeah, yeah.
fantasy is just sci-fi from when the explanation for things was the gods. That was
Yes,
the
yes.
cutting edge scientific explanation for why things happened was a little goblin came and stole your milk. So it's sort of tricky to say when fantasy and sci-fi sort of cross over, but
Mm.
they're sort of drawing from this history of travelogues like Lady Mary
Yes.
Wortley Montagu and, Thucydides, who was like and then there were bats, just making stuff up
Yeah.
and talking about these Orientalist kind of fables where reality and fiction kind of cross over. So the the framing up of these fantasy stories as sort of boring kind of fits in that, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's totally right. They have a much more kind of realistic angle on it, I think.
And then we went there and then we saw all this, like, absolute nonsense stuff, but then we went to another place and then we came home, was
Yeah.
kind of the narrative of those
Yes.
published travelogue.
And that's all you needed really. It's a simpler time.
Do you have another recommendation?
Again, I don't know if I'm recommending it, but I never read any Alan Garner until recently. And for my podcast, plug, me and Alistair Beckett King, we read children's books, from classic children's books. Eleanor and Alice to read that, and we read the Weird Stone of Brisingamen.
I always had the weird Stone of Brisingamen, but there you go.
Listen, man, who knows? It's not real. We can say what we want. And I did enjoy lots of parts of it. So it's sort of these two children, and they discover this sort of other world within the Cheshire countryside, and there's a wizard, and there's an old story about kings and knights, and there's the Weird Stone, which is this jewel that is important to the plot.
Weird stone, man.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I enjoyed lots of aspects of it, and I can see why it was a big hit. But again, the children. I guess my complaint this week is why do men not write any emotions in their fantasy books? Because the children in it are so boring. I couldn't tell you a thing about them. Like they're just like placeholders in a way that other fantasy authors like C.S. Lewis managed to create some quite memorable characters. And there's a lot of there's also a lot of descriptions of people climbing over rocks, which goes on way too long. And to clarify, Alan Gunner himself said he doesn't like this book, so I don't feel too bad slagging it off. But I wanted to enjoy it more than I did. I don't. But yeah, I'd never read any Alan Gunner. Maybe I'll read a later one next that is better, by his own admission.
Well, I mean, a lot of these early sort of sci-fis are also satires in some way of what they, Gulliver's Travels definitely functions as sort of a fantasy sci-fi satire situation. But one of the things we do in this podcast is we
Mhm.
recommend games as well. And of course, gaming was not as prevalent as it is now, but I would like to recommend as a satire Monopoly or the Landlord's Game, which was coming out at about the same time
Oh,
and as a
yes.
satire on land ownership. And if you hate playing Monopoly, you are meant to. So
I do hate playing Monopoly.
there you go. So you see.
Yes.
Now I'm gonna go back for fantasy origin stories. Obviously, I mentioned the Epic of Gilgamesh, first
Mm.
story, first book. Um, but we've also got the Odyssey, which is, I mean,
Yes.
if that's not fantasy, I don't know what is. It's really much the archetype for a quest narrative, early mythological world building.
Alice, the real fantasy is that anyone's wife would wait 10 years. Am I right? Hey, there we go.
Hey,
There
hey.
we go.
Uh, and then to go outside of the Western canon, 1001 Nights or Arabian Nights, depending on your translation, which is
Yes.
Persian folklore, Scheherazade telling stories in order to fend off death. Um, you know, as far as sci-fi, you've got Flying Carpets as pretty good.
Yeah.
It was sort of popularized frame story structures, stories inside stories, and you can read it as a satire on the place of women and on class and power, if you're thinking about it. Obviously, Le Mort d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory,
Yes.
which codified and sort of cut out a lot of the fun bits of existing Arthurian legend.
I tried to read that specific version recently, and it's really dull.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel really bad because I really wanted it to be good, but he's really made that story really boring.
Yeah, not wildly fun. I also recently read, thinking it was a modern book, Lud in the Mist, which was written in 1926 by Hope Mirrlees, in which a sort of a rationalist mayor confronts forbidden magic from fairyland, and it sort of
Mm.
predates, like, it's like early urban fantasy because it's set in this city landscape, though obviously with fewer horny werewolves. And then I also wanna call out for The Broken Sword, which was written at came out the same year as, The Fellowship of the Ring. Paul Anderson, a human who was raised by elves,
Oh.
wields a cursed sword, and it's sort of darker than the Lord of the Rings series, but I feel it kind of got overshadowed by Tolkien's success. I feel like that's definitely worth a mention.
This is just thinking it's not an older book, but it's very historical. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which they also did a really good, in my opinion, adaptation of about about 10 years ago now, which is sort of the premise is to English magicians. The idea is that magic is this sort of accepted thing that used to exist in England and Britain and the world, and then has sort of disappeared, and that these two guys are sort of bringing it back. But it's this very kind of alternative history. So it's set in the Napoleonic Wars, and it's sort of Regency Britain, but then also magicians are a thing, and they're sort of respected or mocked depending on who you're talking to. And the way she writes the book is very, like we were talking about the trouble writing thing, very as if it's taking it's a real account of something that really happened, with all these little appendages and facts and details and dates that make it seem extra realistic. So that's one of my favorite things that's played with the sort of British myths thing, like you're talking about King Arthur, like that kind of mythical stuff, and making it like, what if that was something that actually applied to everyday lives and changed history and things like that. Yes, it's a big book though. It's a chunky book. So it's not a light read, but it's really worth it, I think.
Excellent, excellent recommendations.
Yeah, I recommend the TV show as well if you are like me, a bit lazier and just want to get straight to it.
Or, I mean, I quite like seeing different iterations of the same story. I don't I'm not a believer that a television show can ruin a book, for example.
Yes. No, completely. It is possible to like both.
And that brings me to the minds of where we talk about stuff that we loved that in retrospect is maybe a bit Eleanor, have you been delving into the minds at all?
Yeah, and I feel a bit bad because I do still love this film, but I think Ghostbusters a little bit, which is
Ooh.
one of my favorite films ever. I think it's so good, but rewatching it as an adult, I am a bit like Bill Murray is harassing Sigourney Weaver this whole film, and he's harassing her when she is possessed by a demon and when she's just trying to do her job. And after she's called him for some help, he is just negging her to the nth degree, and it kind of ruins the film for me a bit because I do feel like there's a bit at the end where they kiss, and it does feel a bit like Sigourney Weaver's character's like, right, yeah, okay, fine. I guess I have to get with Bill Murray now. But I mean, it doesn't ruin it enough that I'll never watch it again because I will, I love it. But it's very 80s, like there's a lovely lady here, and she really should date Bill Murray is 25% of the plot that I don't know if I'm that keen on.
Yes, that definitely qualifies for the minds of I am going to put forward Tintin, the
Oh,
comic book
okay.
series Tintin. So funny, so well drawn, so delightful. Anytime you come across a single character of a different race, they are
Yep.
so upsettingly done. And it's so it like I'm lucky enough that I read it when I was probably like 6 or 7. At my grandmother's house, she had a whole bunch of Tintin books and the Phantom comics, equally troubling. But just like you got to respect Tintin, but also, uh,
This is the thing about the Belgians, they seem very mild and bland, but the history, it's pretty dark. Don't Google it. It's really depressing, and even Tintin, especially. I mean, my brother had one of the worst culprits for that, which is the Tintin in the Congo one, and I think it has. They only print it now with the special bit at the beginning where they're like, "Listen, everyone, look, we know what this, we know. Sorry about this. So sorry about this, but we're not. Here it is. Sorry about this." So yeah, I can see how that. Yeah, that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable.
yeah, and then the question with the minds of is would you still recommend Tintin? And I think, yes, strap your butthole on, put a gas mask on. If you're reading with children, be prepared for some long history lessons about why
Yeah,
this bitch isn't as funny as they might think it is.
you could start with the ones with just white people in them, and then progress to all the other ones.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Realms Unknown. If you would like to subscribe to the Bugle channel, please do. And remember, all the books that we mentioned here are covered. They are in our affiliate store. We have a link in the show notes. If you want to see, we didn't really mention any games other than Monopoly, which I'm sure you can find. If you want 3 things to take away from this week's Realms Unknown, they are as follows. Why not delve into Eleanor's suggestion of The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle, which some consider the OG Jurassic Park for early sci-fi and fantasy? If you like modern post-apocalypse zombie stories like 28 Days Later, then check out Mary Shelley's lesser-known work, The Last Man. And for some influential works with great ideas but perhaps not emotional depth, try some Jules Verne, like a classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or the 1865 novel From the Earth to the Moon. That brings us to the end of Realms Unknown. Eleanor, have you got anything to plug?
Yes, I do. First of all, my book, Life Lessons from Historical Women, which is all about women from history who I think are cool but have been overlooked or maybe misunderstood. The paperback of that is coming out in August. You can pre-order that now, or you can buy the hardback. But yeah, that's available in all good places to find books. And I also have my own podcast with Alistair Beckett-King called Eleanor and Alice to Read That, where we read classic children's books and question whether or not we would still read them to children today and how they've held up. So we did The Weird Story of Briengam I just mentioned. We've done The Witches by Roald Dahl, and I think the next episode we're going to record is The Secret Garden. So Yeah.
The Secret Garden. What a delight.
Yeah.
You can find me online at patreon.com/Alice Fraser, where I run 4 weekly writers' meetings, 2 normal writers' meetings, and 2 comedy writers' meetings. So if you'd like to join that, patreon.com/Alice Fraser. There are a few spots left for the Swiss Writers' Retreat in September if you want to come to Switzerland and hang out in a Val d'Illiers for a week, writing with me on whatever you want to write on. Do that. That's available also at patreon.com/Alice Fraser. That's the place to go to download the form to express your application. This is a Bugle podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.